So I'm very pleased to announce our guest speaker today, Bob Srenaski. And we have a bio who he's asked me to kind of shorten it down. He has connections with UW-Madison, international business career, core, and a German multinational corporation. For the last 8 years, he's been a geoeconomics lecturer in the Lifelong Learning Institute of the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay, lecturing on forces of change in the 21st century with the theme, Money Makes the World Go Round. Lectures focusing on the U.S. economy and the national debt program, China's rising threat to the U.S. hegemony, consequences of Russia's Ukraine invasion, demographic trends impacting the world economic future. Now today's lecture is United States national debt problem. So certainly he can cover all of that in an hour. Bob has asked that we hold questions until after he's done speaking. This is being recorded. And please silence your cell phones and any other noise-making devices. And there will be time for questions at the completion.
Q&A.
Bob.
So I'm very pleased to give you Bob.
If you don't like this presentation today, blame Lou.
Yeah.
Right there.
I've heard his presentations before.
All of it, I've changed the numbers. I'll talk for about 45 minutes, around that, 45 minutes. And then I'd be happy to take your questions, as many as you might have, and I'll stay as reasonably long as you would like to have me stay. We need to, as we look at where we are today, if you think about it, we are now in 2025, which is the first quarter of the new century, of a 4-quarter century. And it's not a bad time to look back and see what have we done with the first 25 years of the century. Where have we come? Where are we going? And what does the future look like? And obviously the future is dependent upon what we've accomplished in the first 25 years of the century. And one of the things that we need to talk about is what we have done economically with our country in terms of what we do financially. And I think we always need a benchmark when we're measuring something, whether we're in a race, we have a starting line, or whatever we're doing, even if we're on a diet, we want to know how many pounds we've lost from whatever it was we weighed. So I believe that a good starting point in a benchmark is how we ended the last century, the 20th century. And I would suggest to you that we ended the 20th century phenomenally well. From an economic standpoint, never before have we accomplished in the history of our country 4 consecutive years where we had fiscal surpluses annually to the tune of almost $500 billion. It was so phenomenal, by the way, that the Congressional Budget Office issued a paper and said basically, under current policies, if we don't change course, this is what's going to happen. By 2006, we will have paid off the national debt held by the public. And by 2011, we would have a surplus fund of at least $3.6 trillion for those exigencies like problems with Social Security or Medicare and all of those things. We were in a sweet spot. And by the way, something else happened too that made this turn of the century so phenomenal. On December 26th of 1991, the hammer and sickle flag that was flying above the Kremlin for the Soviet Union was taken down, and the Soviet Union no longer existed, and Russia was a democracy. We ended the 20th century as the hegemon. the most powerful country in the world, diplomatically, militarily, and economically. It didn't get much sweeter than that. I mean, it was perfect. But then, we had an election in the year 2000, and the wheels came off, folks. We had two candidates who were running for president. One said, we're going to continue down the path that we were on, right? We're going to do what the Congressional Budget Office suggested, get rid of our national debt, and build what you would call a sovereign wealth fund, a rainy day fund. And the other candidate said, no, that's wrong. These surpluses indicate to all of us that you have been overtaxed. The federal government shouldn't be taxing that much. And more importantly, if you give that money to the federal government, it'll get wasted in all the things that the federal government does. So here's where we are today. Actually, we have now in the first quarter of this century, basically we started in 2001 with a national debt of about $5.5 trillion. We have succeeded in raising that significantly, as you can see. All right, we now owe just about $37 trillion. That's quite an accomplishment in 25 years, isn't it? I mean, I have children who could, never mind. And we've also been told that Social Security is in trouble. It's going to run out, its trust fund is going to be depleted in 2035. And that doesn't mean that it's going bankrupt. It means that unless we do something to solve the problem, benefits being paid will be cut by about 26%. So if you're getting a Social Security check and we don't solve this problem, your Social Security check is going to go down by about 26%. And Medicare Part A, which is the hospital trust fund, is also going to run into troubles in the future if we don't solve these problems. So what did we do? The president who took office in 2001 kept his promise. And the first thing we did is we passed a tax cut, all right, so that the government wouldn't have all that money to waste. It was pretty significant. And then we started a war because on 9/11 in 2001, of course, we were attacked by these terrorists, right? So we declared a war on terrorism and we invaded Afghanistan and stayed there for 20 years. Then in 2003, we invaded another country, Iraq, and we stayed there for 8.5 years. And then instead of raising taxes to pay for the wars, we cut taxes again in 2003. Very, very significant. So the legacy of those activities were this. The tax cuts, they have added $8 trillion to the national debt. And they're still with us because we didn't reverse any of those. They're built into the tax structure. And those wars on terror added another $8 trillion to the national debt because we didn't increase taxes to pay for them, which we did in the First World War and we did in the Second World War, right? So those added to it. So what could go wrong? Oh my God. We had the Great Recession of 2008, which never should have occurred if the Federal Reserve had really stuck to the regulations that were in place. But the banking system collapsed, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And that, guess what? Added another $3.2 trillion to the national debt as we try to work our way out of that. And then, what will we do when we're in that situation? We passed another tax cut, the second largest in the history of the country. The largest that we ever passed was in 1981, which was, I say, the mother of all tax cuts. This was the child of the mother of all tax cuts. We decreased the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, which is amazing because the National Chamber of Commerce had been lobbying to decrease the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 28%. But our Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided to go better, and we went down to 21%. That's huge. That's huge. So, and now the Congress is proposing to make that tax cut permanent forever. Okay? And if they do that, that will add at least another $4.5 to $5, maybe $7 trillion to the national debt. Then, as luck would have it, we had this pandemic that hit, right? COVID-19. Well, that added another almost $6 trillion to the national debt. Okay? We've done nothing to pay for any of this stuff. So, how do we fix this? What do we do about this, and how do we fix it?
Keep spending.
Well, we have a new organization in the federal government called DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And the promise is that it will cut $2 trillion out of annual federal government spending. And Fortune magazine said this: Elon Musk's plan to cut as much as $2 trillion in federal spending will be harder than it sounds. You have no idea, but I'm going to show you how hard it's going to be. We have two buckets of federal government spending: mandatory spending and discretionary spending. Mandatory spending are the safety net programs. Okay. The things that are also called entitlements. Things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and I'll enumerate those for you. Those are built in and have been passed through the years: Social Security since 1935, Medicare since 1965. Okay? And those programs determine who gets paid and how much they get paid. They're the social safety net, as I said, that we think we need. Okay? The other part is discretionary spending. And that's the responsibility of the Congress on an annual basis. They're supposed to pass a budget. And that budget is for 12 spending bills to keep the government operating on an annual basis. That's discretionary. It's discretionary from this standpoint, that they can fiddle with it on an annual basis, and it's pretty easy to do. Their entitlement programs are much more difficult to mess around with. So they've been kind of sacrosanct, the mandatory programs. But the discretionary programs, they're supposed to pass every year. By the way, the fiscal year of the federal government is not the calendar year. The fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. So 2024 fiscal year ended last September 30th. And we are now well into the fiscal year of 2025, which began on October 1st of 2024. And only the Congress could create this. Right? But because of that, we have the numbers from 2024. Okay? So if you look on your upper right, total revenues, federal government revenues, were $4.9 trillion last year. And we spent $6.8 trillion. So we added almost $2 trillion more to the national debt because we spent more than we took in, $1.9 trillion. And by the way, on all that debt that we have out there, it cost us $881 billion in interest on that national debt. So that gets added to it too, and that basically is mandatory spending because we have to pay the interest on the debt that we've accumulated. And on the bottom part of this, you can see mandatory spending and discretionary spending. The biggest mandatory spending that we've got now is $4.1 trillion for Social Security. Next is Medicare, Medicaid, Children's Health Insurance Program, and the rest of them. And I'll give you a more detailed list as we go forward. But that's $4.1 trillion. Add the $880 billion for debt on the interest, and you've got $5 trillion of the $6.8 trillion that we spent last year. Okay? So we have discretionary spending to fiddle around with. This is, by the way, the current president said we will not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. Okay. So we'll take his word for it, okay? Because that means you can't cut discretionary, mandatory spending. The only thing DOGE has to work with is discretionary spending over there on the right. And as you can see, there are 12 spending bills. One is for the Defense Department, one for the VA, and I'll show you the list of those. But the Defense Department is responsible for 47% of discretionary spending, okay? So these are the mandatory programs. Those in red account for 76% of mandatory spending. And you can see there are some other things in there too, like student loans. Oh, federal unemployment benefits. That's going to go up. Going to go up significantly, right? Because we're laying off tens of thousands of people. And then federal employee benefits funds, those are the retirement funds and their health programs and all that are in there. But the red ones, 76% of mandatory spending. So we have discretionary spending that we can use to cut, right? That DOGE is going to cut. So that's 27% of our annual spending on the federal government level, $1.82 trillion in 2024. Right? These are the 12 bills that the Congress is supposed to pass on an annual basis that funds all the people who work for the federal government. By the way, in mandatory spending, those are the payments, but the people who administer Social Security and who administer Medicare and Medicaid are paid through these bills, all right? So they're in there, okay? Notice that defense and the VA, these two here, account for 62% of that spending, okay? And if you throw in labor, health, and human services, where the people who administer Medicare and Medicaid actually live and get paid, that brings it up to 74.4%. 3/4 of the spending for discretionary spending is in those three categories. We can tend to be led to believe that the federal government just keeps the number of federal government employees just continues to explode. But the data doesn't verify that. These are civilian federal government employees, non-military, in history. And as you can see, it really hasn't exploded hardly at all. As a matter of fact, in 2023, we had fewer people working in the federal government than we did way back in 1990. When we had 3,019,000 working there. And I thought you'd be interested in some comparisons. So in 2023, we had 2,930,000 federal government employees. Well, Walmart had 2,100,000 employees, right? And I just learned the other day that the coffee industry in the United States claims that they are responsible for the employment of 2.2 million people. All right, so when you consider that we have 346 million people in the country, it hasn't grown much. The other thing that you see up there, though, is look at the second column. The real explosion in government employees is in state and local. Look how that has grown from 13.67 million in 1985 to almost 20 million now. So that's where the growth has been. In other words, and by the way, in November of last year, the Wall Street Journal said that 70% of civilian federal workers are employed in defense-related activities. Because the defense budget is not everything that you see there. The defense budget, for example, in the VA bill, there's defense construction, military construction in there, right? So here's where we're at. If you look at what is cuttable and what is not cuttable, okay? You have mandatory spending of 60.5% of total government spending. The national debt interest, which is almost 13%, that gives you 73.4%. Now, if you don't want to cut defense spending and you want to increase it, that is another 12.5%, okay? And the VA is another 5.1%. We don't want to do that to the veterans. What you end up with is 91% of the federal government budget that is now labeled non-cuttable. So DOGE has 9% over there on the upper right. 9% to play with, which is $610 billion, which is a heck of a long ways from $2 trillion. You can't do it. It can't be done physically. And more importantly, this is the trend line from 1974 until through 2024 and forecasted out through 2034. Discretionary spending has been going down as a percentage of our economy. It has not been growing at the rate that the economy has been growing. But what has been growing are two things. First of all, mandatory spending, that big one, the biggest part, and of course the interest on the debt that we can continue to roll up. Okay? And what is the problem? Obviously, mandatory spending, called entitlements, Social Security, health care, and debt interest. Those are the spending problems. Those are where the money has been going. And these, as I said, is one of the big ones, all right? But mandatory spending, when you look deeper into it, the problem is this. Health care in the United States. Health care spending in the United States, when we look only at spending, the big problem is health care in the United States. That is going, now you'll see Social Security is going up for a while because the baby boomers, you young people, I'm older than you, born in 1946 through 1964, okay, are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 a day in the United States today, and they will all be 65 by the end of 2029. It's something I said. So Social Security is going to continue to increase, and then it's going to flatline, if you will. That's not the big problem. And as you can see, other mandatory spending is not, the bottom line, is not increasing over time as a percentage of our economy. All right? But interest is going up as we continue to run up our deficits in our national debt. So major health care programs and interest on the spending side are the problems. So what's driving these costs? All your baby boomers. As I said, 10,000 a day, reaching age 65. And you can see this is from 2011 to 2029. That's when the baby boomers all turn 65. And these are all old numbers from 2014, but they make the point. The older we get, the more we cost from a healthcare standpoint. You know, the older we get, I can attest to that. Things just go wrong, as we know. But I say don't blame it on the baby boomers, okay? Because it's the system. Our healthcare system in the United States is the problem. There is an organization that's been in place for decades and decades and decades that was started after the Second World War. And it's called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. 38 of the most developed countries in the world report all their data on an ongoing basis, okay? And these are, in 2021, the cost per capita for the nation's healthcare systems, what they spend on healthcare in a year, all right, in 2021. We have the most expensive healthcare system in the entire world. The second most is Germany. All those socialist countries don't compete with us in terms of how much they spend. We outspend Germany by 82% per capita for every man, woman, and child. Okay? And bringing it up to 2023, we spent approximately $15,000 per every man, woman, and child in this country on health care. That's what it's costing the government. Okay? And as you can see, it just keeps going up. So why are our costs so high?
Profits.
The system is a profit pyramid. The reality is that sick, injured, and seniors are profit opportunities in this country. Of all those countries, Switzerland does have a profit, allows profit in their healthcare system, but it's highly regulated and controlled. And we're much more expensive than Switzerland. This is me saying this: capitalism harvesting the federal government money tree. And I'll show you how. These are the top industries by revenue in 2024. The biggest industries in the United States in 2024 by their revenue. Healthcare, the top 10. Healthcare organizations are in 3 of the top 5. 3 of the top 5. Hospitals, health and medical insurance, and pharmaceuticals. The top 5. The Kaiser Family Foundation studies healthcare in the United States and does it all the time. This is what they have determined from the publications of corporate reports. Insurance companies' gross profits per enrollee in each of these programs. The individual insurance market, an insurance company has a gross profit per enrollee of about $910 a year. If you're in a group plan, their profit goes up to about $1,000. Medicare, managed care, is the least expensive, and that is a problem, by the way. We'll talk about that. But the real bonanza, the real money honeypot, is Medicare Advantage.
Wow.
Almost $2,000 a year, right? Double what you would get in a group plan. And it's controlled, it is dominated, almost an oligopoly by 4 companies. United Healthcare and Humana account for 47% of all the Medicare Advantage programs. CVS and Blue Cross Blue Shield account for another 25%. And my math isn't that great, but that sounds like about 72% of the entire market controlled by 4 companies. And if you look at the top, you'll see in 2023, United Healthcare had profits that they reported to their stockholders of $34.5 billion on sales of $281 billion. This is a money tree. And then there's one for Humana there. Okay. Enrollment in Medicare Advantage has been increasing. And you should know that by just watching television. Why? Because they're on all the time recruiting us to get into Medicare Advantage. Why? You just saw it. The gross margins of $2,000 a year for every enrollee. Now, 33 million Americans, or 54% of people who qualify for Medicare, are in Medicare Advantage programs. So it keeps growing.
Yeah.
Think about Medicaid, though. I want you to be aware of this. 1 in 5 Americans get Medicaid benefits, right? Because they're low income. That's 70 million people. 40% of all children in the United States receive Medicaid because they're in poor families. And 60% of all nursing home residents are on Medicaid.
What was that 40% again?
40% of all children in the United States are receiving Medicaid benefits. They're in families that Medicaid. Okay.
Poverty,
60% of nursing home residents who have, of course, exhausted their life savings, down to $2,000, right? And now you go on Medicaid. healthcare is the problem from the spending standpoint, right? Not to mention the Defense Department, which has not passed an audit for 7 consecutive years, and is the only federal government agency that has not passed an audit. But laying that aside, this is the big problem. Our costs are 2 times more per capita than those other 37 countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the other advanced countries. And our health outcomes are no better than theirs. We do not have the best healthcare system in the world. Don't have the worst, but we're paying a fortune for not having one that is commensurately higher in quality than the money we're paying. The OECD countries have this other aspect to every single one of these, okay? Universal coverage. It's a human right for all of these countries from birth to death. Everybody is covered, automatically, whether you can afford it or not. This is a profit bonanza for the insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers, which are the middle people between the drug manufacturers and the actual drugstores, and that's where the money is there. Okay. Medicare Advantage is the profit honeypot of the whole system, right? And here's something else that's happening. Because the Medicaid reimbursement to hospitals is so low, and if you go to rural areas, you have a higher proportion of poor people in rural areas than you do in the urban areas. So what's happening is the hospitals are not because this is a profit-oriented organization, they are closing hospitals. We saw that on the western side of the United States.
Wow.
In Eau Claire and one of the other places. HSHS closed 2 hospitals, but they're investing in Green Bay. Why? Because you had more Medicare Advantage customers in the Green Bay area than you had out there. And what's happening as a result of this is there are growing medical deserts across the country where you have to drive 2 hours to get to a clinic or a hospital, or an hour. And those are increasing. So Medicaid is not paying enough when you have preponderance of your customers are on Medicaid. It's a really messed up system. So we have in this country approximately 500,000 people who declare bankruptcy every year because of medical debt. That's a big number. That doesn't happen in any of these other countries, all right? And 8% or 26 million of our Americans, our fellow Americans, have no health care coverage whatsoever. It's not good. So we're back to here. Where are they going to cut? So what we're saying here is spending is a problem, and the problem is our costly medical industry in this country and the way it's set up. But that's not the whole story. But here, this summarizes, okay? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, and debt interest are the big spending categories. Those cannot cut $2 trillion out of our budget this year of spending without cutting Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or defense, and they're actually increasing defense spending. So it can't be done. It's not possible. So let's look at the other side. Federal government income, all right? We don't have enough to cover what we're spending. Corporate revenue as a percentage of federal revenue. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, approximately 33%, 33 to 35% of total federal government revenues came from corporations. It's now 9%. Corporate tax rate has declined over time, and the number of loopholes have increased. Okay, so we went from, and I'll get into this, you can see how the official corporate tax rate has been going down, and now the Congress is proposing to decrease it from 21% to 15%. Corporate revenue as a percentage of our economy. Well, our economy has been growing. This this graph, this line has been declining. You know, so now we're down to corporate income revenue for the federal government is about 1% of GDP. And we have these huge revenue leaks. Even at 21%, the official corporate tax rate, if in fact we got rid of all the loopholes, federal government revenue from corporations, from the revenue coming from those loopholes that have been closed, would exceed what we actually got in. The loopholes cost more than we actually get. Right? And by the way, I spent my whole life in corporate America. All right? Yes. And I believe in corporations making profits. Right? So tax expenditures, those are the loopholes. Those are the special exclusions, exemptions, deductions, special credits, preferential tax rates, oil depletion allowances that we give to the oil companies for taking oil out of the ground, all of those goodies. This is an example of what happened to tax rates, actual tax payments. You can see on, these are the corporations, all right? And you see in the next column over to the right is their effective tax rates for the period 2013 to 2016. And this is to demonstrate what happened after we passed the largest tax cut second largest tax cut in the history of the country in 2017, all right? So what were their, notice only, let's see, it was target, the official tax rate was 35%, right? Only Target got close to actually paying the corporate tax rate of 34%, as you can see. But Verizon Communication paid 21%, okay? Not 35%. Nobody paid 35%. No corporation pays 35%. If you are a CEO, as I was, and we were paying 35% in corporate taxes, I would fire our vice president of finance because nobody does that. Right? Right. So that's what they, but then they put together the same data for the same companies in the period after 2017, right? From 2018 to 2021. And look what happened to the rates. If you take the top one, Verizon Communication, their effective tax rate went from 21% to 8%. Okay? Even, let's see, Visa paid 32% before the tax cut. Their effective rate went down to 18%. Okay. You can see what happened. Honeywell is a real winner. They had an effective tax rate of 23% before the 2017 tax cut. Their effective rate went down to 6%. Okay. And over in the third column, you can see these are the amounts of money that these companies saved as a result of the 2017 tax bill. Okay? And this one I thought I'd just throw in there because I just found it the other day. Tesla. Tesla. Income for 22, 23, and 24, $10.8 billion. Effective federal tax rate, 0.4%. Not even 1. 0.4%. This is what happened after the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. As you can see, over here you see that gray line which says Q4 2017 TCA enacted. You can see corporate profits, the top red line increased, went up. And tax receipts are the yellow line, and they dropped like a rock. You can see what happened. This is, I picked up a number of corporations that paid no taxes recently, right? So 55 of the Fortune 500 paid no taxes at all. Zero. Not only did they not pay taxes, they got money back. Wow. They got credits, okay? So I picked on a couple of them, like Charter Communications, because I'm a Spectrum customer and I hate them. So they had, get this, they had profits of $3,690,000,000, right? And they got back $7 million in rebates. Right? You can see each one of these. The one that was really, really good is FedEx, because they had $1,218,000,000 in profits, and they got $230 million back from the federal government. Corporations actually get money back. I remember when they passed the 2001 tax cut, I was still gainfully employed, right? And I have a copy of the check that we got back, our corporation got back from the federal government in my file at home, because we could claw back taxes that we paid in the prior 3 years under certain circumstances. Okay. So what about non-corporate tax revenue? It's not just the corporations, folks. Way back a few years ago, an employee of the IRS disclosed the income taxes of 400 of the top earners in the United States to ProPublica. That was against the law, and he's actually in jail today. He was put in jail as a result of it. You think we're going to put those in the jail? Right. But anyway, so 400 of these, the top earners, okay, to make it into the top 400, okay, each person on this list had to have reported income of at least $110 million in each of those 5 years in this period. Okay? So as I said in here, if you're making $40,000 a year, you have to work 2,750 years in order to make as much money as they did in 1 year. Okay? So these are the richest people. And these are some of them. So there were 400 of them, and I picked only some of them. Okay? And so I have 2 slides. These people, you can see their effective federal income tax rates, right, over there on the far right. I picked these guys because in spite of the fact that they're making these huge amounts of money and they're not paying much in taxes, at least we can say they are examples of capitalism at work. These are the entrepreneurs. For most of these people, they created new businesses. And they grew those businesses and they employed a lot of people. That's not an excuse for them only paying 13% in federal income taxes. But these are the job creators, okay? Then there's these people who I really like to pick on. These are the heirs, the inherited money people, okay? I like the Amway people and the Walton people, the Walmart people. Now, oops, sorry. And the one that I really like to point out is Betsy DeVos, our former Secretary of Education, all right, who made, during these 5-year periods, averaged $112 million a year in income and paid 10.6% in federal taxes. That was her rate, right? And you can see the Walmart heirs. One thing I would say to these people, to the Walmart people, you better talk to the tax accountants of the Amway people, because they pay a hell of a lot less than you do. And ladies, oh my gosh. Right? So there are many, many more. The point is, it's not just corporations that are not paying the stated tax rate. It's a lot of other people, particularly wealthy people. Right? Example, when you consider the payroll taxes, not just income taxes, it gives you a different picture of what's happening. A single worker earning $45,000 a year pays an effective total income tax rate of 21%. Those top 400 that I just talked about pay an effective tax rate of 23%. Something wrong with the system. I think you would agree. So, and then there's a lot of cheating. And it's not necessarily violating the law, it's pushing it to the extremes, and then you get caught, and then you back off, or you get fined, or you settle with the IRS. Right? So, in 2019, a study of households that was done by the Brookings Institute, $20 million in income or more, these people we're talking about, hide at least 21% of their income from the IRS going to declare. manipulated. And then there's the shadow economy. Now, I don't know about you, you got your roof replaced and paid cash, all right, or whatever. There's the cash economy. So our economy, our GDP last year was almost $29 trillion. It's estimated that the cash economy, the dark economy, the gray economy, is about 5% of GDP, all right? So that's about $2.3 trillion of GDP, all right? And since no taxes are paid, that costs us in Social Security payments that are not made, okay? Income taxes that are not paid, because all of this is hidden money, somewhere between $350 and $500 billion a year that we're losing because people are paying in cash. And I know I've been there. Yeah, I'll replace your roof, or I'll do this, pay me in cash. Right? Here's my cash price, and here's my regular price. Right? So we're losing that. And then the other thing that we have been doing since 2010 is we have defunded the tax police. It has been deliberate and it has been steady. From 2010 to 2021, the IRS budget has been cut by 19%, the staff by 22%, while the number of tax returns has increased. And that has, the police, the enforcement, checking on these people, this is what's happened. The overall audit rate during that time period went down by 58%, almost 60%. The audit rate for the largest corporations was cut in more than half, and for the audit rate for millionaires was cut by 71%. And the reason for that is these are the really most complicated IRS filings, tax filings that you can get, and it takes a lot of work and expert staff in order to go through these, and that's what happened when you cut. So the audit rate on millionaires has fallen 71% since 2010, and now the audit rate for millionaires, these people we're talking about, is 2.4% of them actually get audited. The rest don't. So you can see where it's easy to cheat, if you want to call it cheating. So, and then those decided that we still have too many people employed in the IRS, the tax police. So thus far, 4,700 of them have taken early retirements. 67 have been fired because they were on probationary status, all right? So they've completed reducing 11,400 people in the IRS, and they're planning to cut another 6,800 on May 15th this year. Conclusion. We have a serious problem, right? We have greater debt, high interest costs, and then these numbers that I've presented today tell the story. This is the real story. These are the numbers. These are the actual numbers, okay? And this is the Peter G. Peterson Institute, which is a very conservative organization. Peter Peterson was the Secretary of Treasury during Ronald Reagan's administration. And they're saying, if you don't do something about this, if this doesn't change, you can see where the red is going over on the right of the screen.
What was that called, the Peterson?
Peterson Foundation.
Peterson Foundation, okay.
Yep. If you Google the Peterson Foundation, you're going to get a lot of information. Remember this, though, they're very conservative, all right? So they are not advocating increased taxes of any significance, right? But their data is good. Their data is good. It's reliable, okay? So we have a serious, serious problem. So think about this. Think about this. Put it in perspective. The United States has only 4.2% of all the human beings on this earth. 4.2% of the Earth's population of over 8 billion, okay? And yet, we account for 26% of the world's economy. 26% is here in the United States, the world's richest economy ever, okay? We are responsible for that, okay? We have 32% of the globe's liquid investable wealth $67 trillion. We are the most wealthy country ever in the history of the world. So what do? It's time to reduce the national debt and protect the good faith and credit of the United States. And that's how we fund our debt. We sell bonds, the Treasury sells bonds. Right? And the bonds, the price that the Treasury gets for those bonds is based upon that, the good faith and credit of the United States. Good as gold, right? If that erodes, the cost of selling those bonds is going to go up. People are going to be willing to pay less for those bonds, and therefore the return on the investment has to go up, which means the interest on the debt in the United States is going to increase the rate much higher. We borrow today at a lower rate than any other country in the world because we have political stability in this country, and we have done a good job up until this point. And we have managed our economy well, particularly in the 20th century, as I showed you before. When you start eroding that, it's really bad. So it's time to fix our unaffordable and inefficient healthcare system and provide quality care to everybody. We have to overhaul our tax system. It's gone off the rails. Okay, and this is my opining. The world's richest country, I believe, everybody should have quality health care, and nobody should go hungry. When we are responsible for 26% of the world's wealth. There's another thing too that I think is very, very important. Our economy, 70% of this great economy that we have, is driven by consumers. By consumers. Not by business and not by government. 70% of this economy is driven by consumer spending. And the National Bureau of Economic Research provided this. Political stability is enhanced by the presence of a wealthy middle class. And we built the middle class after the Second World War. Right? And rising tide raised all ships after that until 1980. Even the poorest people's bracket took them in. The wealthiest incomes increased at the same rate as the least of people in this country. And it changed in 1980 with that great tax cut. Income inequality increases political instability. Political instability increases the probability of insurrections and coups, civil disorder. Political instability, uncertainty about the future of the country, decreases investment in the country. Invest elsewhere in other countries that are more stable and look like they're going to continue to grow. And more unequal societies in them, fiscal wealth redistribution through distortionary taxation is higher and results in lower economic growth, GDP growth. And my statement here is destruction of the middle class is bad economics and really stupid capitalism when it's responsible for 70% of the country's economy. People want this to get solved, but they don't have all of the information. Question? All right, Lou, he's first.
Okay.
Your argument seems to be not that the federal government is spending too much money, but that the federal government is not taking enough money out of the private economy. If the federal government took an extra $2 trillion per year out of the private economy to pay for their spending, what would that do to our economy? Would we not then crash into a recession?
Well, first part of that is we're spending too much money on a healthcare system that is outrageously expensive. So we can fix the spending side as well, okay? If we had a healthcare system like most other countries do, and each one is different, and our costs were the same as theirs, we'd be taking trillions of dollars of federal government spending. Right? That's on that side. okay? And the second part was, what are we gonna do?
If we take an extra $2 trillion out of the private wealth-creating part of our economy, isn't that going to basically run us into a recession or worse?
I have a counter argument for that, okay? And that was the greatest tax cut in the history of our country was in 1981.
Speak up.
It was called supply side economics, if you remember. And the theory there was, if you cut taxes, you will put more investment income into the capitalist aspect of the country, and they will build, invest, and create more jobs, and we will become wealthy. And as a matter of fact, for that investment, the taxes on the increased economic activity would more than offset the amount of the tax cuts. It didn't work, it never will work, and it doesn't work. Okay? We do more damage by driving up the uncertainty of the future of the U.S. economy by running these deficits than we would in showing the world that we know how to manage our economy.
Well,
Okay.
I could counter that, but you got questions.
So how come, do our political leaders that we have now understand all this stuff? Because this is serious stuff. And why is that? It sounds like we're being run by oligarchs.
Well, I don't want to talk about our political leaders because I try to make this factual and I don't want to get into the political arguments. But clearly the direction that this group is going, and there's another group, we'll call it the old Republican Party. Remember when the Republican Party was the party of fiscal responsibility?
Yes.
So, yeah, we're not heading in the right direction right now, clearly. Ma'am?
So, I know our government keeps statistics on people's ages and how people are growing old. How come 30 years ago, they didn't start planning on the baby boomers turning 10,000 a day from 19 whatever, 2000 whatever to now? How come they didn't budget and plan on that? They knew that was going to happen.
Well, some changes were made, if you recall, because the age of retirement to get Social Security payments was increased from 65 to 67, I think it is now, okay? So they planned on that, but they didn't go far enough, right? So,
Not with the healthcare system. Yeah, it's not the social, like you say, it's not the Social Security payments. It's what we're paying to the hospitals, the doctors, the pharmacies. That's what's killing us.
okay. Any other questions? Okay. Lou?
Yeah. The healthcare system, like you pointed out, is really responsible for some of the biggest costs that we face as a society. Now, is it prudent? I had a good friend that fell down. He's 90 years old, and he got a hip replacement. I mean, is that prudent? I mean, really.
He was probably in favor of that.
I mean, and it's happening a lot.
Well, since I'm getting close to that age,
Yeah.
I would say yeah.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true 80-year-old.
Hey.
So, if there are no more questions,
Oh, I have a ton of questions.
Maybe later.
Beth?
I mean, seriously, how do we fix this? And to that gentleman up front's question, if we started taxing the rich people, wouldn't that make a huge difference? I mean, really?
Well,
Why should a millionaire pay no taxes and I'm busting my butt at the age of 68 working 2 jobs so that I can keep my house? I mean, this is just ridiculous.
well, that's the decision that the voting public has to make. But these are the facts, all right? This is what has happened. This is how we got to where we are. I think the facts speak for themselves. The solutions are up to us, right? Yes, sir.
I have a question about how inflation factors into this and what we can expect. Is this inflation partially from the spending that occurred during the COVID period, or?
Yeah, inflation Inflation rose to about 9% a year after COVID, I believe it was, which is not the highest. We've had 15% inflation before.
70,
Yeah, 70s was the worst. And so now inflation is down to about 3%. It has gradually come
Good luck
down.
with that.
And that was the result of a lot of spending. It was a result of a number of things, okay? Number one, pent-up demand. People couldn't get a lot of stuff, and what they could was on the shelves. The prices went up, okay? But the federal government injected a lot of money into the economy to keep it from tanking afterwards, and that resulted in inflation. So we came out of that in 2022 just with a roaring economy and 9% inflation. Okay, so now it's down to about 3%, and the target of the Federal Reserve is 2%. By the way, you don't want negative inflation because that means your economy is going down, right? So the Fed is saying, you know, 1 to 2% says this is a great economy. So, and by the way, with some exceptions, the president is not personally responsible for the inflation rate, whether it's this president or prior presidents, okay? It's the Congress that passes the bills, the budget bills, if you will, the spending bills, and the tax bills. Yes, sir.
In the very beginning of your presentation, you show that there were 4 years where there was a fiscal surplus.
Right.
But if you go to the Federal Reserve website, and other websites confirm this, every one of those 4 years, the national debt went up. So was the government cooking the books and engaging in creative accounting, or what? How do you get the fiscal surplus, but the national debt keeps increasing?
Because you're dragging a national debt along. If you look at it, though, the increase in the national debt in those years was decreasing.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
I can pull it up. Send me your email address and I'll send it.
I will. So we had, it was in a decade, it was the least increase in the national.
Okay, it increased, okay.
Oh, yeah, it increased, no
Last
question.
time it decreased was under Nixon. The national debt went down under Nixon. That was the last year it happened.
It was, the rate of increase in the national debt during that period decreased, but not the national debt.
So why was there a surplus in the fiscal budget, but the national debt still went up?
Because we still had huge national debt coming in there, and the fiscal surplus did not overcome the increase in the national debt that was built into the system.
Sounds like creative accounting to me.
And it's not a creative accounting, it's the way, it's actually economics. It's
Well,
not-
economics is the dismal science, as they
Right,
say.
right, well, this is
Let's
very
go on
good.
for more
Right.
questions.
Look,
Yeah, I wonder if you'd comment on, our drug companies,
Time to go.
about 60% of their budget they spend on advertising.
who?
Our drug companies.
Sure.
And then you turn on the TV and, they're just bombarding our population with buying this drug. And the fact of the matter, it works.
Yep,
Of course it works.
I have no comment on that.
No, but I mean, it's really, shake your head.
Okay,
Take my questions.
sure.
Look, I have two things to say before we thank Bob for his wonderful presentation. One is, want to make an apology to Bruce Dans, who by miscommunication thought he was presenting today. The day that he's supposed to present, he's going to be camping in Patagonia someplace. Well, I'm sure yours is going to be excellent too, when we get a chance to see it. Our next speaker will be Brady Carlson, who's an NPR host, and he's going to be talking on dead presidents inside the world of post presidency. So I don't have a clue what that's about. But I really am very thankful for your presentation today and willingness to take some more questions. And we'll defend you.
Let me add. We were recording this today because this is going to be on YouTube.
Oh,
And it will, and with the slides, so you can go through the numbers if you want, you can double check. them.
Under what
How do you
name? or-
get it?
On YouTube,
It'll be under YouTube for Bob Srenaski, but it'll also be under Facebook, under Robert Srenaski Discussions.
okay, there you go.
Thank
Got it?
Possibly
Right.
scary.
Thank you very much for